Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 34 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Lisa Heffernan, co-author of the brand new book out this week called Grown and Flown: How to Support Your Teen, Stay Close as a Family, and Raise Independent Adults. This is one of those episodes that is not grief-specific. I was so glad to talk to Lisa about her new book because so often I hear from widowed parents that one of their challenges isn't really related to grief at all. It's that they find themselves in a new role as the only parent for their kids and they need to handle everything alone. So I figure the more information and insights we can get, the better in terms of helping us with this job. Our discussion is also relevant for your friends who are not widowed parents, so please do share it with them if you find it helpful. Some topics that Lisa and I cover in our discussion include what parents most want to know about raising their kids during the older teen and young adult years, how parents can tend to feel isolated when their kids get older and face problems that can be more difficult to discuss with other parents than little kid problems, signs that you may be overparenting your teen or young adult, the 4 main things your child needs to know to manage their health when they're living away for the first time, 4 key academic lessons that your teen should learn before college, tips for getting through the 11th grade, tips for parents to stay sane during the college search and application process, ways to support struggling college students without taking over, and what surprises Lisa most about the late teen and early adult years. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Lisa Heffernan of Grown and Flown. My guest today is Lisa Heffernan, co-author of the new book out this week, Grown and Flown. Lisa is joining us today from New York. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. I'm so glad you're here today to talk with my listeners about your new book, which is about parenting older teens and college students. And I have to say, I found you guys because Dr. Lisa D'Amour posted a really fantastic review of her book, your book, on her Facebook page. And I had gotten a lot of great feedback about my discussion with Lisa back in episode 13, and she was focusing more on parenting middle school students and high school students. And so I knew right away that listeners would be interested in hearing from you about your new book, too. So actually, let me just read. I thought this was really cool what Lisa said in her review of your book. She said, Heffernan and Harrington deliver the book we've all been waiting for, a wise, researched, and essential handbook on raising late adolescents and young adults. At once practical and profound, Grown and Flown brims with sensible advice and describes how we can support older children while fostering their independence. I am recommending this book to every parent I know, and keeping a copy close at hand to answer parenting questions of my own. So with that review, I knew we had to talk.
Thank you. It's incredibly kind of her. We're huge fans of Lisa's work, as I know you are.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah. In fact, I recommend her book Untangled to everybody I talk to. So I thought we could start out today, if you don't mind. I'd just like to ask you to read a passage from your book to kind of set the stage. And so this is from chapter 1.
As it is for most families, the transition through the high school years and on into college was an upheaval in our homes. Our kids wanted to spend less time with us and more with their friends. They shut down or poured forth in conversation, and we never knew why or when they would be in either of these states. They could be terrible to their siblings and mouthy to us as they pushed us and their fathers away. Mostly that felt like they were obeying the natural order of the universe, even if it was sometimes painful. On some days, it was easy to feel as though nothing about our parenting was working. Yet on other days, when we saw glimpses of the adult emerging from the teen, they took our breath away. Occasionally, we could feel both of these things on the same day. 2 words, all normal.
Thank you. I think a lot of parents can relate to what you just read.
I think one of the difficult things for parents, of teens is that question, and I know Lisa deals with it also, is what is normal?
Yes.
We're experiencing some of these really difficult, challenging moments with them. And you're just sitting there in the back of your mind thinking, is this the way they're supposed to behave? Is this okay?
Yeah.
Is the fact they're being so horrible to the sibling they once loved so much, is this okay? And by and large, it is.
Yeah. Such a good point. And actually, I should say, because I know you guys in your book are not grief specific. And the reason actually that I think it's good that we're talking is because it's a broader parenting question. Now I have these older high school kids and college kids, and I don't know what to do. And for my audience, we find ourselves now the only parent trying to figure this out on our own. And so I think that, putting this in the broader context of, let me understand my older teenager or my college student better so I can be a better only parent.
One of the larger messages in the book is that we become very isolated in parenting in these years. We no longer have our experts in our lives. We don't really talk to their teachers. We're not supposed to go into the pediatrician. They're getting older. We don't talk to their coaches. That's for them to do. And as they begin to drive or they become more independent in taking transportation, we lose touch with a lot of our parent community at all. So many parents, whether they're parenting on their own as a parent without a spouse, or if they're parenting with a spouse or a partner or an ex-partner, still feel very isolated.
Mm-hmm. Well,
very alone. That is a universal experience.
Yeah, and to add on to that, the other, I think, excellent point that you made in your book was that in terms of the alone piece of parenting, is that when kids are younger, it's so much easier or more natural to talk than with your parent friends about, I'm having trouble with potty training, or, my kid doesn't want to go to kindergarten, what should I do? And as the kid gets older, maybe it's because the problems could be bigger and harder to discuss, or maybe it's just an increasing sense of your kid's privacy or whatnot. It becomes harder then to get that peer advice as well.
It's absolutely more difficult for exactly the two reasons you mentioned. It's not hard to talk about the fact that your kid doesn't like camp. It is hard to talk about the fact that your kid maybe got a DUI or got caught cheating or is suffering from some anxiety and depression and really not moving forward the way you see other kids moving forward. And that's, of course, causing you concern. Those are much more difficult things to discuss. When you run into a friend at the grocery store, those aren't casual conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So let's start out here with a really basic question. So what does grown and flown mean? What does the name refer to? What age group are you guys talking about? And what, in a nutshell, what is grown and flown?
So grown and flown is actually a British expression for the stage at which our kids begin to get their independence and move into their own lives. And so we couldn't think of a name for the website when we wanted to start it, so we grabbed that one. Grown and flown really, in the terms of our website, and we have a large Facebook community of 120,000 parents and a newsletter as well, are basically the high school and college years. So we say it's from 15 to 25. But it largely focuses on those sort of 8-year period where the kids are going through high school and perhaps college or perhaps working those first years, or military, those first years out of high school. But it's the period in which your family is in transition. It is not like it was before, and it's not like it will be later when they're adults and they have careers and they have their own homes and things are, set and their paths are set. It's this period of transition for our families, which if you have one kid could be 10 years. If you have 2 or 3 children, a family can be in this sort of period of transition for more than a decade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you said you have 120,000 parents. Wow. That's cool.
We do, yeah, in our Facebook group, which is a fantastic conversation about every aspect of parenting kids this age.
Yeah, and going right to that thing we were just talking about maybe the difficulty of talking about some of these topics in real life. And I've seen on your blog and your different parts of your website, some of the articles are submitted anonymously, so people are pretty honest about what they're dealing with. And I think that would really help then people who might be going through those same things but don't know who to talk to.
It really does. When you find out that your kid is, having some sort of trouble and some sort of difficulty, you can often feel like it's only you. And you may actually not know anybody in your real life whose kid is going through the same situation. So I'll use an example. Mom came into our group and her son had gotten into trouble in college for cheating. She doesn't know anybody else who's gone through that experience. She doesn't know what some of the next steps are. She doesn't know how to support him. She doesn't know what kind of punishment he may get from the university. But when you go into a group like this, dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of parents may have had a similar experience and can offer you some of the wisdom that they gathered during that period.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So with so many parents and so many years of doing this, I'm wondering, what is it you find that parents most want to know about raising their kids during this time? What's kind of the big concern or the big thing on their mind?
The big thing on all of our minds is the same. So one of the things about our group is people are from every single background and every single geography and different in every single way. And we have one thing in common, which is we all want our families to remain close. We want to stay close with our kids while still allowing them to move into independent adulthood. And that is happening in such a very, very different way than the way we did it, that we all feel lost. So we may have gone off to college at 17 or 18 years old and called our parents once a week. We were largely unsupervised as a generation. That is not, as you and your listeners know, that is not the way our kids deal with us. They text us questions at the drop of a hat. What does this light mean that just went on my dashboard? What am I supposed to do? What do you think? Mom, do you like the blue ones or the brown ones? Here's a picture. So our conversation with them is ongoing and continuous, yet they still need to become independent as we became independent. So the number one thing that we find, people are trying to walk that line. And sometimes it feels like a very narrow, balance beam between staying close as a family and bringing our kids to independent adulthood.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, because I think sometimes people are quick to say, oh, if the kid is texting the parent every other day about the light on the dashboard and the ironing and the this and the that, maybe they're too dependent. Yes. But then how do you navigate that, right? Because I think you talk in your book about kids actually want to stay close, but in an independent sort of way.
Yes. So, there's a couple things that I think that are really important to think about. One is we look at our own experience, the experience of the second half of the 20th century, maybe the 80s and the 90s, and we think that is the way families separated. That is not the way families always separated. Families, lived in towns and villages, and we may not have left for college. That was a rare thing through most of history. So kids learn to be adults by being around other adults through most of history. You would have apprenticed at what your father did. You would have worked alongside your mother. We became adults by watching other adults. And then suddenly there's this situation where we send 18-year-olds away and they become adults without us. And that's a little bit unprecedented. So some of the questions and the interaction we have with them, that's not necessarily bad stuff. I think it's really important for us to remember that this is a really, really well-behaved generation. They're one of the best behaved generations ever. They are more educated. They are more inclusive. They are more open-minded. They drink less. They have sex with fewer partners. They have it later. They have less unprotected sex. And when you put those two things together, you have fewer unwanted pregnancies. Drug use is down except for marijuana, and that's pretty much unchanged. So in every way, they're coming to an adulthood in a better way than we came in adulthood. So this isn't a failed model, this constant communication and this closeness that they have with their parents.
Thank you for going through that. I found that really interesting as I was reading your book, and I wasn't aware of that generational anomaly, I guess. Because I also grew up in the 80s and 90s, high school in the 80s, college in the 90s. So I know what you're talking about there. I'm thinking about how there's been so much talk in the news recently. Well, it's not just in recent months, in recent years even, about helicopter parenting. Now you're hearing about snowplow parenting. And I think there's a Carleen parenting. I think I read, maybe, was that in your book?
I think we talked about... We talked about hovering, drone parenting. Drone parenting is one that often gets brought into it. They're all mechanical. I've noticed that they're all lawnmower parenting. They're all mechanical devices.
Devices, yeah. So, and you guys actually have a section called 5 Signs You Might Be Overparenting Your Student and a few suggestions for alternatives. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. What are some of the warning signs then that you might be overparenting, and what should you think about instead?
Sure. One thing I just want to start with is most parents aren't helicopter parents. So it makes for a great story and there's tons of press. But the New York Times had an article out last spring where they asked parents whether they did a large survey, and they asked parents whether they did a bunch of different things. Things like calling your kids professor, calling your kids boss, helping your kids with their work. And what they found is there were parents doing these things. It was about 10% of parents doing some of these more egregious things. But And so the headline was, oh my gosh, look, there are these helicopter parents. I think you can flip it on its head and say, that means 90% of us know what's right and wrong. It doesn't make a great headline to say 90% of parents aren't helicopter parents. That's not going to sell. That's not going to get clicks or sell newspapers. But I think parents don't need to worry about it as much as they think they do. There is a small contingent of parents who are overparenting in a way that is perhaps destructive. We watched the scandal with the colleges recently, and that obviously was overstepping many, many lines. But most of us have a pretty good sense about overparenting. So some of the examples that we use in the book is when your kid is struggling in class, overparenting would be, of course, calling the professor. You have no business calling the professor. You probably in high school, unless it's something really drastic, have no business calling their teacher. What good parenting is talking through with them their options, even when they're in college. Have you gone to the resource center? Have you talked to your TA? Just posing the questions for them, thinking it through perhaps out loud with them. You're not going to take any action. You're not going to do anything for them. You're not going to solve their problem. But they're still kids. In many cases, you're still teenagers. So you can talk through how they might solve the problem. You can even do this in a sort of a didactic way, asking them the questions. Do you know what resources are available at the college? Have you explored them? So you're not interfering. You're not running their lives. You're not making decisions for them. You're just helping them think out loud. So that's good.
Well, it almost reminds me of how you might coach another adult, say an employee or a friend. I mean, you wouldn't tell them what to do. You might approach it much more the way you've just described.
Absolutely. And we use this as an example. If you would do this for somebody else's kid, if you would do this for a nephew or a close friend's son or daughter, you can do it for your own kid. So, when your kid is looking for a job, would you proofread their resume? Of course, you would proofread a nephew's resume. Would you write your nephew's resume? No, you wouldn't write your nephew's resume. So you shouldn't be writing your kid's resume either. It actually works as a really good litmus test of what you should and shouldn't be doing. Would you sit down with a friend's son and daughter and tell them about a career or a field of work that you know a lot about? Of course you would. So you should be doing that with your own kid. Because how would they know? They're young people. They haven't been out in the world of work. So, that's mentoring. So when you think about moving into the mentoring role,
right,
you're on pretty safe ground.
A really good yardstick. Yeah, thank you. I hadn't thought of it quite that way before. So I have to keep that in mind. Okay, so let's talk about something practical here for a minute. Let's talk about health. So you guys have a number of chapters in your book, actually. I don't think I asked you yet. Can you just kind of broadly give us a landscape of the topics that you cover?
Sure. The book is not chronological precisely. We didn't, wander through 9th grade and 10th grade and then 11th grade. We took the sort of major areas of life. So we talk about family life, we talk about health, we talk about love and sex, academics. Each of these is a chapter that we go into in depth, both with the works of terrific writers and the works of experts. So there are physicians, there are psychologists, there are teachers, there are college professors, a college president. Dean of students wrote about how you graduate in 4 years. So a lot of the book is expert content by people for whom this is what they do professionally. We have a chapter about separating and letting go and about beginning college life and actually moving in. So it's more thematic than it is strictly chronological.
Yeah. Okay. So thinking about the health piece, I think you had a really good discussion, kind of the 4 main things that your teenager needs to know about health as they're transitioning out of your home and transitioning into managing their own adult selves. So what are those 4 main things you need to make sure that they're familiar with?
Sure. One of the first ones is where they would go for medical care if they needed it. So we have more options now than we've ever had. There's the student health center. There's local doctors. There are clinics inside of pharmacies now. There are freestanding emergency rooms. There are urgent care centers. There are emergency rooms. When a kid goes onto a college campus, they may not know all of these options, and they may not know when you use which option. You probably made this decision for them when they were in high school. You probably said, you know what, we need to go to the pediatrician for that sore throat. It's not getting better. Or that gash looks terrible. That probably needs a couple stitches. We need to go to the urgent care center. So talking through with them why we go, where we go, when we go, and where these resources are available to them near their college campus. To be truthful, they're going to call you and text you when something happens. So you probably be able to weigh in on that decision, but they can't always reach us. And again, Learning experiences, you're not going to do it for them. You're teaching them about something that adults need to know, which is where you go when you need help. So that's one of the important things. The other thing is, how do you know when you're sick enough that you need to seek health care? So that tickly throat, you give that a day or two. That really bad sore throat that's now going to day 3 and you're starting to feel a little feverish, well, we all know that looks a little like strep, and you probably need a culture for that. Your kids don't know that. You, again, throughout their lives, we have made many of these decisions for them. And in some cases, we had to make them for them because before they're 18 years old, honestly, they can't do anything for themselves. I can tell you, I sent my 16-year-old to the doctor, the pediatrician, once by himself, and the doctor couldn't give him an immunization that he needed without my signature. I didn't really think of it. So they can't even authorize their own health care. So we've probably taken control of it. So the next question is, how sick are you and what is it we go to seek medical care for? And that's just a learning experience and something they're going to need to know for life. Another question is, how do we treat ourselves when we are sick? So again, so much of this book is mistakes that we learn from as parents. I sent my eldest to college freshman year, and I didn't actually send him with any over-the-counter medications, which was, except I think maybe some Advil, my mistake. As all kids do, he got sick freshman year. He got one of these nasty colds he couldn't shake. Went to the pharmacy, bought 2 different things. One he thought was for the runny nose and the sore throat. The other he thought was for the cough. He takes both of them, and then he calls me and tells me he doesn't feel well. And the reason he doesn't feel well is he's double dosed on the same active ingredient. So now he's taken twice the dosage. Because he doesn't know about reading packages, because I have given him medication. When he was in high school, I would hand him and say, "You're sick, take this." That's another thing we really need to teach our kids. It's super, super important.
I think I made that same mistake in college. I'm thinking now, I remember standing in the pharmacy aisle and picking out something that was a syrup, like a Dayquil or something, and then seeing the Theraflu, which would be a nice warm beverage for a sore throat, and thinking, oh, I should take that too. That sounds nice, right? And then like you said, you've doubled up on the medication.
Doubled up. Yeah. Exactly. Now I feel really, really strange, Mom. What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
So that's another thing. That's the third thing we really need to teach kids. And then the last one is about accessing healthcare. So they need to know their medical history. Again, the doctor, they may have gone to the same pediatrician all their lives, and they may never have had to tell their medical history. They may never have had to explain a condition they have, a surgery they had, or something like that, because it was all sitting there in the pediatrician's office, and they never had to explain it. And to the extent that something did have to be explained in an emergency room or someplace, we may have done that for them. So they need to know their medical history. They need to know how to use their health insurance card. Again, something that may have been on file at their pediatrician and they never saw and never used. So all of the sort of administrative ways that we access healthcare, we need to teach them while they're in high school before they get to college.
Yeah, all things that I weren't necessarily on my radar screen before I read your book. So thank you for going through those with us. And also, actually, there you had a very helpful list in your book. I think it was a list of contents for a first aid kit for a college student. So I think if that's available on your website, I can put a link in the show notes to that. Exactly. And one of the things, it was written by a pharmacist mom of a freshman. So she was in a position both to think about what she was going to send her kid with. And of course, this was her expertise professionally. Yeah. And she talks about not giving them multi-ingredient medications for just what you and I are talking about. That's a big no-no with kids. Yeah. It's worth looking at. Right. Okay. And so on the topic of, you mentioned sending your 16-year-old to the doctor and not being able to get the immunization. So, and I know there was some discussion, I think it was on your Facebook page recently, about like how have other parents handled this with their 16, 17-year-olds? When do they send them by themselves? When do they not? Do you go and sit in the waiting room? Like, do you have any thoughts on, how you maybe start encouraging independence, or how to manage that part? Yeah, this is like so many things, it's different for different kids, because your kid may have a chronic illness or a serious illness, and your involvement may be far more necessary than it is with a kid who doesn't have any particular health condition. But towards the end of high school, so we're talking about 16 plus or even senior year, going to the doctor alone, learning which medications to take, going to the pharmacy and actually buying something yourself or filling a prescription. Let's say the pediatrician has given your kid a prescription.
send them into the pharmacy alone and let them try and fill it, because you're right there. If they make a mistake or they do something wrong or they don't give the insurance card in, or you're there to help with a mistake. Better that than when they're away at school. Yeah. So this is a good thing for the sort of last 18 months of high school, maybe the last year of high school. Don't try and squeeze it all into that final summer of high school, or don't do what I do and leave it till freshman year in college. But yeah, the last year of high school, it's a good time to start doing those things, recognizing that they will not be able to authorize, if they're still 17, they will not be able to authorize their own health care.
Yeah. Okay. And sticking with the topic of health for a minute, how do you know, like, when should you start thinking about taking your daughter to the gynecologist for the first time versus the pediatrician that she's been to maybe forever and is familiar with? Yeah.
Well, we interviewed a gynecologist who works a lot with young women, and we were going obviously by her expertise, and she took the recommendations of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So her thoughts were, once you think that your daughter is sexually active at all or interested in becoming sexually active, she needs to see a gynecologist right away. This may not be an examination. This may be a conversation. This may be opening the door to an expert that can be in her life and give her information she may need. If your daughter asks about it or mentions it, she felt that is a sign that this is something that's going on in her life and that you need to take that as a sign. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology had some recommendations about age. She was very clear to say you need to know whether your daughter is 14 going on 18 or 14 going on 12, and that each mother and father, should judge their own child differently, and how mature they are, and what their social life is like, and what their romantic life is like. But that a gynecologist can become a person that your daughter can speak to, not necessarily be examined by. Don't not take your daughter because you fear that she's not ready for an examination. Many, many times the first visit is just a long conversation, a private conversation, giving your daughter that resource of somebody to speak to when she needs it.
Okay. All right. Good to know. And one more question on health before we turn to academics. When a kid turns 18, what should parents know? Because I think the whole game changes, right?
It changes completely. There's something called FERPA, and I'm not going to be able to remember what FERPA starts for, but it's federal legislation that doesn't allow us to learn about their grades, their academics, or we can't, the doctors can't and won't speak to us because of HIPAA. Many parents, and there are two sides to this argument, many parents ask their kids to sign forms that are often available on the college website, releasing both either their grades or releasing medical care and medical information. There are two sides to this argument, and we met with a woman who ran student health services for Columbia University, and she gave us the two sides of the argument, and every parent needs to think about this on their own. One side of the argument is you have a relatively young person, an 18-year-old, and you may be able to help them if they have a serious health situation, if you know about that situation. She said the other side of the argument, and parents need to consider this, is sometimes kids will not seek medical care for something like an emotional problem or perhaps sexually transmitted disease if they fear their parents will see their medical records. So you need to think about this, because you will be gaining something by asking them to sign a release, but you perhaps could be losing something in giving them a fear. Maybe they drank too much, maybe they'd like to seek medical care, but they're afraid to do it because they know that you will find out. This is not a strange situation in college. This is something that, of course, happens in college. So you need to think about that. There's a plus and there's a minus to that. And again, it's every family makes their own decision.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Let's switch gears and talk about the academic side of things, because I know you have quite a bit of good information in your book talking about the different pieces of academics. First, let's start out with something really practical. These parent portals. I think everybody now is familiar with them. Obviously, we didn't have them when you and I were in school. But this idea that parents can go in 10 times a day if they want to and look at their kids' grades in detail down to which assignments are in or out or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that? Well, actually, first a question. I know they exist in high schools. Do they have such a thing in college too? Or is it really just a high school thing?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
It's largely a high school phenomenon.
Yeah.
Like so many things, it's, again, different families, different situations. Many parents, we asked our 120,000 parents about this. Many parents told us they found that it was making them crazy If they were finding their kids' grades out before their kids even knew their grades because the teacher had registered them into the portal and the kids hadn't been to class yet and gotten their papers or their test back. It is monitoring. It is tracking. It's a different kind of tracking. It's like a tracking device, but you're tracking their academic work. We asked a lot of experts on it. There's a lot of difference of opinion on it. Where we come out on this is when kids are very young and just starting high school, maybe in ninth grade, maybe you keep a little bit of an eye on it just to make sure they're managing ninth grade. For many kids, that's a big leak up and they can start to struggle. And then you want to advise them on getting some extra help, talking to the teacher. Again, not you doing those things, but some of the things that they may do. But as they get older, they need to learn to manage these things on their own. So what we suggest, and again, every family needs to do exactly what works for them, is sit down with your 17-year-old and say, let's agree what we expect you to do this year. So it can be, I expect you to try your hardest and make sure that all your assignments are in and that nothing is missed. I expect you to get a certain grade. Every family will be different. Every parent and child have different expectations, and the child is working to a different standard. As long as these expectations are being met, the portal remains closed. So you're allowing your student, you're saying, I trust you to do what you tell me you will do. That you will, keep a B average, that you won't let your grades drop below a C+, whatever the decision is between you and your child. But when you aren't keeping up your side of the bargain, perhaps the portal is opened. In other words, as long as you do what you agreed to do, I trust you and I won't need to check on you. At the point at which you're not turning in assignments or it's not going well as we agreed to, perhaps then I begin to look at it again. So It's used as a way of expressing your trust. I trust you to do what we agreed on, and I won't do anything as long as you uphold that trust.
Okay.
Just something for parents to think about.
Yeah. No, thank you. And in terms of the, coaching them academically, I think you guys outlined kind of 4 key lessons regarding academics that you want to try to somehow convey to your student, I guess, by the time they've finished high school, or maybe, I'm not sure at what point, but can you kind of walk us through what those 4 key lessons are, and maybe when you should be trying to make sure they've learned those?
So these were 4 things that we think that kids need to learn over the course of high school to help them thrive in college. So one of it is they need to learn how they work best. There are kids who work in front of a computer with the headphones on and the cell phone binging and distractions everywhere, and they manage to work fine that way. There are other kids who need to sit in a quiet library with no one around and no sounds and, total silence. If you don't know how you work best and you're in college, you won't be able to do your best work. So one of the things we felt is that high school is the time to learn that about yourself. It's different for everybody, but if you know when you go to college how you work best, you'll know to get out of your dorm room. You'll know to get out of the common room if that's a situation in which you can't study. You won't have to get a bunch of bad grades your first semester to find out how you work best, because you will have worked that out for yourself in high school. So we thought that was really important. The second one is we think that kids need to learn about how to define their own expectations. These expectations could be about challenging yourself. These expectations could be about a certain grade level. These expectations could be, I'm in a super hard class, and if I come into the middle of the class, I feel like I've done really well. Again, for every kid it will be different, but if you don't define your expectations, it's very easy to drift and get lost, because freshman year in college is very different than everything that went before. So learn a little bit about your own expectations. Super important. Kids need to learn how to talk to their teachers, because when they're in college, they're going to need to speak to their TAs, to their professors, to people at the learning center. This is something you don't want to be learning freshman year. So over the course of high school, it's important that we as parents encourage them to go to their teachers when they have problems. Encourage them to talk through things with their teachers, to get to know their teachers a little bit. One of the things that a lot of research has shown is that kids have a better experience in college if they get to know a professor well, or even more than one professor well. They do that by learning to get to know their teachers in high school. So again, high school being a trial run for college, learning these skills while you're still at home with your parents so that you can use them in college. And the last one, and this is probably the most important one, is time management. So many parents tell us, and so many college students tell us, they can handle the work. What they haven't been able to handle is managing the overwhelming number of things they need to do in their lives. So you'd much rather your kid learn these skills in ninth grade, fall on their face a little bit in ninth grade, overcommit themselves, learn how much sleep they need, learn whether it works best for them if they write everything in a planner or if they keep, their notes in their phone. Learn how the time management skills work best for you, because for everyone it is completely different. So that when you get to college, you're not trying to figure that out as well as everything else you're figuring out.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for taking us through those, because I think those are some good sort of broader perspective questions for parents to be thinking about.
Kids who learn those 4 things in high school can then take on the challenges of college without taking on those challenges also. Those things are all learnable about yourself in high school. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about 11th grade? My son's not there yet, so I hear that 11th grade is the hardest year. What should parents know about 11th grade, and what tips do you have for getting through that?
So we describe it as the 7th circle of hell.
Okay.
So that gives you a good sense of what we think of 11th grade. So the problem with 11th grade is it's a challenging year academically, but it also gets layered upon that. Perhaps doing some college visits. Many kids are getting their driver's license. So on top of all the things they're already doing, they're learning to drive. They may have ACTs, they may have SATs, they may have PSATs, they may be taking their first AP test. Maybe they took one in 10th grade, maybe they didn't, maybe taking 1 or 2 in 11th grade. There's a lot going on top of what was already going on, and many kids are taking the most challenging classes that year. So the overarching thing to 11th grade is get as many things out of 11th grade as you possibly can. What do we mean by that? If your kid can learn to drive in the summer between 10th and 11th grade because their birthday falls in such a way that they can do it then. Why put that on top of everything they already need to do? If your kid is ready to study for maybe the SAT in the summer before 10th and 11th grade, and this may not be a super intensive study, this may just be starting some practice tests, going on Khan Academy, maybe buying a practice book, start that in the summer. They will have much more time in the summer between 10th and 11th grade than they will have during that very, very difficult academic year. So the overarching theme here is try and take as much out of the year as you can. Make sure that they're starting the year as well rested as they can in 11th grade, and that they have a plan to get enough sleep during 11th grade. The first thing that goes for kids, maybe exercise, but the second thing that goes is sleep. And then their poor performance isn't because they aren't able to do the work, it's because they haven't slept enough. So teaching them something about how they're going to manage that is super, super important. So we go through some of these things, and we hope that they're helpful to parents. I don't think that people should do a super, super intensive college search starting right in 11th grade toward the second half of 11th grade, maybe a couple of college visits. But in 11th grade, they can do what we call a little bit of soul searching. What kind of college do I want to go to? How far do I want to go from home? Do I want to be in a big place? Do I want to go to a state school? Do I have an idea of what I want to study? So that will narrow down my choices. Just that first looking inward at yourself. So when you actually start looking at colleges, you've answered a lot of the questions about yourself. The first semester of 11th grade can be a time to answer some of those questions about yourself that you really couldn't answer when they were in 9th and 10th grade because they're too young. And that they will need to know when they start trying to make a college list and do some college visits.
So speaking of the college search then, what tips do you have for staying sane during that college search and application process?
So this is the parents staying sane.
Yes.
We need the parents and the kids to stay sane. So a couple of things that we talk about that we think are really helpful. Find one friend to go through this process. You're going to need to talk about it. You're going to want to talk about it. You're going to want to talk about the ups and the downs, the disappointments, what your kid is thinking. Find one person who will go through this with you, who adores your kid and is rooting for your kid. And just talk to them. If you talk to lots of different parents, you will go crazy. To that larger point, tune out the noise. It's only your kids you need to worry about. Don't worry about where other people's kids are applying. Don't worry about where other people's kids have gotten in. It's very, very hard to do. People are talking about it. At some point, it feels like it is the only subject. And it can become quite overwhelming. So learning to tune out what's going on with other people is super, super important. One of the problems with the college process is, I don't know, I applied to one college. you hear that story all the time that we applied to one college, we applied to 3 colleges. Many kids now are going to apply to 4 colleges, 6 colleges, even 8 colleges. These colleges have different dates the applications are due. They require different information. They require often different essays. It is a logistical nightmare in terms of keeping all this together. If you have a kid that's not incredibly organized, I've been through that particular scenario, it's really helpful to not get crazy by saying, you're going to make a spreadsheet, might be on paper, might be online. You're going to chart out everything you need to know, and then you're going to tick things off when they're done. And that way we will both be sure that nothing falls through the cracks. The worst thing is if you miss a deadline for a scholarship, miss a deadline for an essay. With one of my kids, I discovered that art supplements needed to be in 2 weeks before the application. Who knew? So there are a lot of little twists and turns like that. If your kid is involved in arts or music or theater or athletics, there's a whole nother layer of tryouts and auditions and all sorts of things like that. So just charting it all, getting it all a place where you and your kid, and this is them doing it, it's not you doing it, but can make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. Super important both on the financial side and on the application side.
Yeah, okay. So let's say you get through that whole process and now your kid is off to college. Can you talk a little bit about separating from your child when they leave for college and any kind of tips you have around that?
Yeah, but I can't give you very good tips because I did a particularly bad job each time. When I dropped my 3rd son in college, I had to actually pull over on 95. Anyone who's in the East Coast will know what I'm talking about. I had to actually pull over on the shoulder of 95 because I was crying so hard. I thought, I am a danger on the road. I'm a danger to myself. I'm a danger to the other drivers on this road. And I have never had to do that before or since. So in terms of separating, some of the things that people find are helpful is making a plan about how and when you're going to see your kid next. It kind of feels like you're walking away forever, but of course you're not. So are you going to see them at Parents' Day, which is in October, or you're not going to see them till Thanksgiving, or when's the next plan you're going to see them? How are you going to talk to each other? Your student may say, Mom, I'm going to text you and I'll tell you when we want to talk. That's your plan. You might say, you know what? First couple of weeks, I'd like us to talk twice a week just to hear. I just want to hear that check in that everything's going okay and that you're doing fine and I don't need to worry. Quick call, 5 minutes. That's all I need. That might be a plan. It's important for us to remember that it's not like when we went to college. I think part of the problem that it's so difficult for us is that we imagine the scenario that we lived through, where once a week we would talk to our parents at the end of a hall and we were worried sick about the long distance rate. It's not the situation we're facing. There probably won't be a landline at the school that they could use, and they don't know how to use one even if there was one. So remembering that they are not facing the situation that we faced when we went off to college is super, super helpful. If you are feeling sad, and if you are feeling worse than you thought you might feel, go easy on yourself. It's absolutely a normal thing that when somebody you love as much as you love your kid is leaving home, that you would feel this way. Conversely, if you are not feeling sad, if you are just feeling overwhelmingly proud, don't let those other parents who are crying on the side of 95 make you feel bad about yourself. You're a great parent too, and you obviously have a great relationship, and you should be feeling proud. So it's super important for us to not bring should into the conversation. You feel the way you're feeling, and it's fine. Mm-hmm. And just set up a plan with your kid about how you're going to keep in touch.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And if you find that they are struggling, your college freshman is struggling, can you talk a little bit about what is the parent's role or what is not the parent's role, and how can they be best supportive in that kind of situation?
Sure. You know, Lisa describes this, our kids calling us up and telling us everything that's wrong with their life and then hanging up, as Lisa DeMore, as taking out the emotional trash. So part of our job is just to listen. So they're in college. They may not have any close friends yet. They've just started. It's not like high school where they have their lifelong friends there. Sometimes they may just need to call us and dump on us. They need to say, you know, I hate my math class. I'm not sure I like my roommate. The food here is horrible. I don't know what I'm doing here. And then they hang up the phone with you and they go off to some club they just joined and they're as happy as a clam. So part of our job is just to listen. You don't need to intervene. You don't even need to, half the time you don't even make suggestions. Just be there because they haven't made those close ties that they're probably going to make over the course of college. Second thing is, to be there and make suggestions if they really are lost. So if they're struggling in a class, they're struggling a bit emotionally, remind them that the school has services, the school has resources. Remind them to go seek those resources. You're not going to do this for them. You're not intervening. You're just reminding them, didn't you tell me your TA had office hours a couple times a week? You know, I know the school's got some great mental health resources. Why don't you go over to the health center and see what's available for you? There might be somebody who can talk to you. So just reminding them what's there if they need to hear that. There are cases where kids are really struggling and they may call you and they may need your help. So I don't want to tell parents to take too light of a touch. If your child is really truly struggling, then you obviously need to take note of that. And one of the things when we spoke to the head of student health service who said to us that we should remember that nobody knows your student that well. So just because your kid is quiet, your roommate may think that your kid is just quiet. They've just met them. What do they know? You may know that means they're struggling, really struggling, because your kid isn't normally quiet. So for the first couple of weeks, maybe even the first couple of months, keep your ear to the ground just a little bit to make sure that they're getting with the program. Remembering that the research tells us about 65% of freshmen in college are homesick. So things like just good old-fashioned homesickness are not really something you need to worry about. Just listen in case the problems are any more serious than that.
Okay, that makes sense. I think if I can pick up a theme maybe across multiple topics here, whether it's their health, their academics, the adjustment, it sounds like moving into a coaching role in this time of life is really what, as a parent, maybe we should be seeking to do.
Absolutely. Moving into a coaching role, but staying close. I mean, I think, again, there's a lot of research on this. There's been a lot of surveys on this. We are going to remain much closer to our kids than we remain to our parents. Our kids are more likely to talk to us about their romantic lives, their financial lives, their careers, and what's truly on their minds. And they're going to do this through adulthood. We're finding that this doesn't end in ways that we may not have done. It's particularly pronounced for boys. Boys of this generation, Gen Z and millennials, are much more open and much more forthcoming with their parents. And, we don't need to look at this as a bad thing. If you or I had a problem with a relationship, let's say when we were 19, we would have sought the counsel of another 19-year-old who knew no more than we knew. Our kids are more likely to seek our counsel, and we do know more than the 19-year-olds do. So it's not a bad thing that they seek our advice. But yes, you've got it right in the role of coaching and mentoring, but remembering we're going to stay close with them in a way that perhaps we didn't with our own parents.
Yeah, that makes sense. So as we're almost out of time here. A couple more questions, if that's all right. I guess I'm thinking kind of stepping back as you look at your own experience and with, all the parents and people you've talked to, what would you say surprises you most about these late teen and young adult years?
The thing that surprises me is what I just mentioned to you, how close we stay to them and how that does not mean that they're not an independent adult. Just because your kid goes into a dressing room and takes a picture of the blue shirt and the gray shirt and says, "Which one do you like, Mom?" doesn't mean they can't make a decision. It may mean that they just want to touch base with you. They want to share the experience with you. So we should confuse them wanting to remain close to us with them not becoming independent adults. So the thing that surprised me the most was how much conversation we would have with them as they got older, how close we'd remain to them. I think in the book we call it the digital dinner table. So that conversation that we've had over decades at the dinner table, probably the wooden dinner table, has now transferred into the digital space. Mm-hmm. So our families remain close because we're in group chats and group me's and all these other ways that the kids know how to get us all on the same electronic page. It's that conversation is so rich and so fun, and sharing the things that we all love, whether it's talking about food or talking about sports, whatever draws our family together, and that we continue that closeness, that will remain forever. And that this technology that certainly has some downsides, one of the wonderful upsides is that we able to remain into sort of that closeness with each other and keep in each other's day-to-day lives.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just to wrap it up here, let me ask if you could say one piece of advice or encouragement to listeners about parenting older teens and college students, what would you say?
I'd say don't go it alone. You need experts, you need community, you need friends, the same way you did when your kids were in diapers. So, you could sit there and think, my kid is the only kid who's homesick, and he's calling me every week saying how homesick he is. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with him? What's wrong with the college? If you stay in a community of parents or just a couple of other super close friends and you talk to them, you'll find out that their kids are homesick too, and that it's fading by Thanksgiving time, and that after Thanksgiving, everybody's kids felt just a little bit better about their colleges. So keep that community. It's an enormous help to you, and it's an enormous help to your family.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if you don't have that community, it's I think checking out the Grown and Flown community, or even if you do have that community. But it sounds like you guys are, in addition to this book, are providing that kind of vehicle to normalize and share our experiences as we move through this time.
Exactly, just like we did when they were little. That community can be online. That community can be your college friends who live 1,000 miles away from you, but the three of you stay in touch, by text, talking about your kids who are all, leaving for college the same year. It doesn't necessarily mean the people who are literally physically with, but finding a community where you can talk to other parents.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's a great place to end. So my guest today is Lisa Heffernan, who's the co-author of Grown and Flown, a new book out this week about parenting older teens and college students. So Lisa, where can listeners find the book, and where can they find your community and find out more about Grown and Flown?
They can find us at grownandflown.com. On Facebook, they can find our Facebook page at Grown and Flown, or our community at Grown and Flown Parents. The book, which comes out September 3rd, is available everywhere at all major booksellers and online.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Lisa Heffernan as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 34. And hey, it's great to be back after August break. Over the past month, I've been busy writing the first draft of my memoir, which is tentatively titled Cancer and Caregiving, Helping My Young Family Survive My Husband's Terminal Illness. Look for more on that in the coming months. In the meantime, I've got some great guests to bring you in the coming weeks. Next week, I talk with Allison Gilbert about practical ideas for keeping the memories of our loved ones alive. And after that, I'll be talking with Nancy Berg about taking sabbaticals after loss, with Lisa Williams from the popular grief blog, What's Your Grief? And so much more. Be sure to subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss new episodes each Wednesday. Thanks for listening. Until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.